Hello and welcome to the Andrew Faris podcast. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the show. And today on the show, I'm going to talk to you about a question that gets batted around between agencies and brands all the time. Maybe if you are on the brand side, you've worked with an agency and they have asked you the question, well, what's your target? What's your goal? Before we spend money, we want to know what your goal is. And you have probably asked them back, well, what's good? What's a good ROAS, etc. That is not the right way to answer this question, and I can help you to determine what the right way is, I think it will be useful to you. This is a really crucial question for getting a lot of things right in your business. I want to help bring some intelligence to it. Let's dive right in. Okay, so being on the agency side in the past and just having dealt with a lot of clients, I do hear the response to the question, what's your target? I hear the response all the time, well, what should it be? What's a good goal? What's a good target, etc. And in fact, when people bring me on to consult with them, sometimes they bring me on with the hope that I can answer this question for them. They really don't know. They don't feel like they know how to determine what the right sort of target they should be pursuing is. And this is before you talk about attribution, which we'll get to in a second, sort of like what's the actual target and then how do I know if I've hit it? But what's the actual target? And this is so important, right? If you just think about the finances of your e-commerce business, so many e-commerce businesses are built ultimately on paid spend to drive new customer revenue. And that's fine. I mean, at some point you want some organic customers. I tend to believe that the number one source of organic customers for most e-commerce brands, or I should say organic revenue for most e-commerce brands, entrepreneurial e-commerce brands, is returning customer revenue. That you'll get some word of mouth over time. You'll be able to generate to some degree some amount of organic new customer revenue as well, but that really the way that you minimize ad spend against your total revenue is by getting customers to come back. That's the number one source of organic revenue in a business. And if that's the case, then to me, it's not really a big problem if you are relying on paid channels to drive large portions of your traffic. Of course, your business will be better if you can also get a bunch of customers for free. That's the dream. And if you want to understand one approach to doing that and think about this, it's not quite true to call it free, but go back and listen to my episode with Isaac Medeiros. It's actually the most popular episode of my show that I've ever recorded, where Isaac explained how at Minikatana, he built, they did $10 million in revenue last year with $0 in ad spend on the back of organic content. So it's possible. It's possible. Organic content might be the way to do it, but it's not truly free. Of course, there was plenty of money spent to generate that content, but it is possible. But for many of us, most of us, and even for Isaac, by the way, the link for that is in the show notes. Go check that out. For many of us, most of us, including Isaac, like I said, there is a desire to spend money on ads as a source of profitable customer acquisition. Profitable, quote unquote, you actually, if you're, capitalized a certain way, profitable may actually not be the goal, but that gets at what the issue is here. What is the goal? How much should you be spending? And how do you determine what that number is? And so I want to walk you through that. And the reason this is so important is because, if you break your P&L into 4 sections, I've talked about this on the show a lot of times. There is, you've got your revenue over the top, and then you break that revenue, and then your revenue minus your costs is your profit. Well, you can break your costs into 4 sections, and those sections are cost of delivery, which would include your COGS, your shipping costs, any variable costs associated with getting the product to the customer. Okay, COGS, shipping costs, merchant processing fees, pick and pack, any of those kinds of things. Those would all count under cost of delivery. You would have operating expenses or SG&A. That would be any fixed costs associated with running your business. So, salaries and fixed software costs and building, rent, that sort of thing. And then number 3 would be ad spend. And for most e-commerce businesses, or CAC, right? The 4th section, by the way, is profit. So those are the 4 sections, right? So the 3rd section is CAC, cost of acquiring customers, and customer acquisition costs. Holy cow, excuse me. For many, if not most e-commerce businesses, especially early, CAC represents a huge portion of your cost in your business. And so thinking about how much you can allocate to that, this question of what should your ROAS target be really is a question about what portion of your P&L should be CAC. That's really what we're getting at here, right? And what that means is if you get this wrong and overspend on that, it's directly going to eat into your profit. If you get this right, or if you get this wrong and underspend on it, then you are not going to be able to create enough revenue potentially to clear your OPEX, and your fixed costs are going to look a lot bigger against the total revenue you drive, etc. So it's this huge portion of your business, and understanding and having a strategy around it is really, really crucial. So how do you think about this? Okay. When I first started in e-commerce marketing, I thought about this in one and only one way, and it's still a helpful heuristic to begin with. What should your ROAS target be is basically, first and foremost, a question of, well, it depends. What are the variable costs associated with selling your product? What are your unit economics? That is, how much does it cost you to get a product into a customer's hand? Because before you talk about OpEx or SG&A, before you talk about that in your P&L, you can create a delta between the revenue you get when you acquire a customer and the cost it takes to get that product to the customer, right? So let's say you have a product where your COGS themselves, like the actual goods themselves, including your packaging, is, let's say it's $100 AOV. Your COGS all in are $25, so 25% of that AOV. And then your shipping costs and fulfillment and all those things, that's another $25. That would be high against $100 AOV, but whatever, just go with it for a second. Okay, that's another, well, no, let's call it $20, okay? And then let's say there's another $5 in things like merchant account fees, like Shopify fees, those sorts of things. And maybe you have a very low return rate on your product. You probably should factor that in as well. That let's include in your shipping fees, things like your pick and pack and your processing fee and all of those kinds of things, right? So after all those costs, you've got $50 left over, right? Now, if you, and we'll say 50%, not just dollars, 50%, okay? If you can sell enough products to where that 50% of your P&L on that one purchase, right, has enough room in it to cover your SG&A, right, and your OpEx, then you at that point have created profit in your business. As long as the cost of acquiring that customer does not run up past that $100. So here's what I mean. Let's say it costs you $25 to acquire that customer. You're getting a 4-to-1 ROAS. Well, now you've got $25 left over. So we had $100 in revenue, $50 in COGS, $25 in CAC, and now you've got $25 left over. So if you can sell enough products so that the number of products you sell times the AOV, times that contribution margin, we would call that, right, is $25 times the number of products you sell. So let's say you sell 100 products. Okay, and you've got $25 of contribution margin on each of those products. If you can sell enough of the products so that's $2,500 in revenue. If you can sell enough products so that $2,500 now covers the cost of running your business for, let's say, a month, let's call it a month's time period, for 1 month of your P&L, then you have now your business is profitable. Okay, and you can run this at a much larger level. And so in that respect, there's a very simple way of looking at this, which is that if you have positive contribution margin at enough volume to cover your OpEx, then you've got the ability to have a profitable business, okay? So I hope that makes sense. As long as you sell enough products to where that contribution margin multiplies out to be enough to cover your OpEx, now you have a profitable business, okay? So let's say your business costs, again, this is silly, but $1,000 a month, okay, to run. Well, you just made $1,500 in profit, all right? And your OpEx as a percentage of your revenue, in that example we just gave, your OpEx as a percentage of your revenue is actually 10%. So you now have paid 50% in COGS, 25% in CAC, 10% in OpEx, and the only thing left over in your P&L is 15%, $1,500 in profit. Now, this would be a very, very small business, but of course it could happen. It could be somebody's side hustle somewhere, and there you go. And of course, you can just add a 0 to all those numbers and have the same situation. So that's the basic idea. So if you do that, then you've got the original idea. And when I started in working in an agency, this is the thing we talked about all the time. We were just very, very concerned about sort of profitable unit economics and trying to sell as many products as possible so that we could at break even or better, basically. As long as we were beating break even, we wanted as much volume as we could possibly get. Because the logic was really simple, right? If I can give somebody $1 and they will give me $1.01 back, then I want to do that as many times as I possibly can. Now, if I can give somebody $1 and they will give me $1.02 back, I'd rather do that than $1.01. But at some point, what if they stop giving you $1.02 back? What if there's a number of times you can pull that lever And no longer can you actually do that anymore. And they say your next two choices are you get the extra 1 cent back or you get no money back. Well, look, if those are your choices, you take the 1 cent back. Okay. And this is basically the concept of how I thought about a lot of ad spend. As long as you had some amount of profit, then you could go from there. And the first thing I will say here is that this is actually a fairly decent way to run an e-commerce business, especially if you are not trying to go to the moon. If you run your business first order profitable, and you are pretty confident you can do that at enough value to where the contribution margin covers and beats your OPEX, you will have a profitable business. In fact, there's one simple way of thinking about profit, which is contribution margin minus OPEX, right? So contribution margin would include everything that we just talked about, COGS and CAC, basically, everything associated with creating a product and getting a customer. And now you've just got the cost of running the business. As long as the contribution margin from those products and customers cover the cost of your business, you've got a profitable business. And now, crucially, any person that your customer tells about your business comes free of charge, and and all of their contribution margin, there's no CAC on that customer, right? You've already paid the CAC to acquire the first customer. So let's say I tell you, watching this video or listening to this podcast, if I tell you about my product and you buy it and I paid to acquire you, right? So let's say I got you through a Facebook ad, okay, and showed you the product and you bought it. If that happened, and then you told your friend, well, there's whatever CAC I paid for you, but your friend came free. And so now the contribution margin on your friend is much higher because the contribution margin doesn't have to cover any CAC. And so now that second person is much more profitable. And if you see where this is going, this leads to a second and really a more obvious and more regular point, which is that if you come back and buy a second time, well, that second purchase is much more profitable. And it's my contention that most e-commerce brands work based on their ability to get that second purchase from a returning customer. Now, some brands work on being able to acquire a new customer at a very high CAC. But this is where this starts to get a little bit, a very low CAC relative to their AOV. This is where this starts to all get a little bit more complicated and where we need to make some adjustments relative to your business. But I want to pause and just note what this goal is. If you are trying to just run a profitable business over time, one simple way of approaching this ROAS target question is to say, as long as I acquire that first customer profitably, and as long as I can do it at enough volume to where my contribution margin covers my CAC, covers my contribution, covers my OPEX, as long as that happens, I have a profitable business and I am safe. And I would say if you are newer in e-commerce, if you feel like if a lot of the things I just said about OPEX and SG&A and contribution margin and CAC and all these things are making your head spin and you haven't thought hard about how to finance your growth and you feel like the financial area of running your business and thinking about some of these things and some of the mathy stuff are all the hardest parts for you, and you don't feel like you're that deep and detailed on that, well, first, try to get some more knowledge around those areas. Of course, go watch everything Taylor Holiday's ever put out. And, I've got some episodes you can go check out to go start thinking about the finances of running these businesses. But also recognize in yourself, and especially if you don't want to raise debt, if you don't want to raise equity, recognize in yourself that that's a pretty safe way to approach this. And if you can just model out what the potential volume on your ad spend is and what the potential CAC is, and then give yourself that target, then you can think about, okay, I can be profitable on first purchase. Everything else that happens after that is gravy, and I can have a profitable business. And you can do that without stepping on any landmines of stretching your customer acquisition so thin that it makes it really, really hard on a cash basis to grow your business and to ever generate any real meaningful profit. So I do think this is a real consideration that people don't think about enough when they think about what their targets should be and how they should think financially about their business. What is your skill set? If you as an operator aren't that good at the financial end of your business yet, or you're newer, that's okay. Like I've been in those shoes before. Have some humility about it, recognize it, go get the knowledge you need, but at the same time, make the game easier on yourself. If you just create a decent amount of profit on that first purchase, as long as your ads are working and you're able to accomplish that one thing, then you can build like a really solid, strong business. And especially if you are not trying to go to the moon. Like I said earlier, like if you are trying to build a 9-figure business or whatever, or something bigger, it may be the case that thinking this way may be not sophisticated enough, especially if you're trying to do it fast. And also it just may not be able to get you where you're trying to go quickly enough to think about just everything about on a first purchase level. Okay? But, I've talked to like one entrepreneur recently who wants to grow about he wants his business to a little more than double in size over the next 5 years. And to, it's still a good sized business, still mid 8 figures, low mid 8 figure business, but like really good business. But this is not a goal of like go, build the next giant consumer goods monster brand, build your own P&G or whatever, right? Like that goal is achievable. And if you want to do that, and maybe you even have a goal around like not having a super stressful entrepreneurial life, and maybe you did this to create freedom and autonomy in your life, in that case, that's a great goal. That's a great way to approach this. And you can be really safe just by thinking carefully about the gap between the cost of getting a product to a customer and how much profit that leaves for you in CAC to pay out. All right, I talk a ton, including in this very episode, about the financial advantage e-commerce businesses have in their operating expenses. And here's what I mean. E-commerce businesses can get surprisingly large while having small teams and minimize expenses, especially if they're fully remote. There's no office fees or anything like that to pay for. And I've seen like 8-figure businesses with 3 full-time employees, which is crazy, millions of dollars per head, which is a remarkable metric. This remains true as you grow. In fact, it probably only increases. It requires the same amount of work to write, design, and send an email to 1,000 people as it does to send it to 1 million people. So there's a significant economy of scale there. And for these reasons and a bunch more, e-commerce operators should be thinking about how to keep their OpEx low as a percentage of their revenue to create more profit in their businesses. And that's where my friends at More Staffing come in. More Staffing connects you to incredible e-commerce talent in the Philippines. More Staffing handles everything you need to recruit, onboard, and retain brilliant, professional team members in every area of your e-commerce business, especially if you need help on the operations side, all from the Philippines. Now, obviously, salaries in the Philippines are lower than they are in the United States, but talent and integrity and work ethic are often as high or higher. So it's not just about cost, it's about quality. And that takes this natural advantage of e-commerce, which is low OpEx as a percentage of revenue, and ratchets it up to a whole new level. If I had my own e-commerce business, I mean this 100%, honestly, More Staffing would be my first call if I needed to add team members in any part of my business. They should be yours too. And honestly, why wouldn't they be? What is the counter argument to doing this? You should be considering it if you're adding team members. So explore adding incredible talent from the Philippines to your team now by visiting More Staffing at morenow.co. That's morenow.co. There's a link in my show notes. Go check it out. Tell them you heard about them from me. Okay, so starting on first purchase, unit economics only, thinking about all of those things: packaging, cost of goods, anything related to, freight in, freight to the 3PL, freight to the customer, pick and pack, all merchant account fees, returns, those kinds of details can all be there and can all be accounted for. As long as you account for all of those things, you can get a really good start. Now, however, there is a second portion of this to start thinking of. And this is something I didn't used to think about very much, but I think about with every brand every time I look at it now. And that is LTV. It is now so much easier to get LTV information for your brand than it used to be. This comes standard in a lot of different places. Shopify is rolling this out in their dashboard. You can see some of it, although theirs is less robust. I like using Lifetimely quite a bit here to figure some of these things out. Lifetimely can tell you really fast and for relatively cheap, in fact, quite cheap, sort of what the value of a customer to you is over time. You can look at it by first product purchase. This is another area of this. And you can start to think about, wait a minute, how much actual lifetime value do I have on this customer? You could also, by the way, think about if there's any way for you to get a sense of any significant word of mouth effect, right? Basically, what is the multiple on that customer that you acquired that creates more customers or more purchases in the future, right? So if I acquire customer A today, either they tell customer B or customer A buys a second time. And those happen at some rate or another. And if you can have some quantity or quantifying of those outcomes, and you can have those in a relatively predictable way, then you can begin to think about being more or less aggressive relative to that first purchase in your target setting. And so here's what I mean. I have worked with one client that has a customer who buys today. If they spend $1 today, they will, on average, spend another 80 cents over the course of the next year. Okay, so they have an 80% increase in value over the course of a 1-year time period. Now, who even knows what happens in year 2? The client, their brand hasn't been around long enough on their core products to even really measure this seriously. And for some other reasons, it's not really worth getting into. But that 1-year time period, if there's a significant increase in the value of that customer, and that's 80%, that's pretty high in this case. If that's the case, then I would say to them, they probably need to start thinking about getting pretty aggressive and play their ad spend a lot more aggressively, because that LTV is pretty bankable. And that's a pretty high number. And because that second purchase is so much more profitable in contribution margin than the first purchase, they should probably be thinking about how aggressively can they acquire those customers, especially if that client, and with this client, who knows what the answer is, but if that client has goals of building a very big business. Now you really want to think about how aggressively you can acquire those customers, because if you can acquire them, like even maybe at a first order loss, probably not all of your customers, but it's some of your customers, even at a first order loss, you could actually still generate a lot of contribution margin over the course of the year, right? Because again, let's say it's a $100 order. If I pay, let's call it $50 in CAC on that first purchase, and it's, to come back to the example earlier, if I pay $50 in CAC on that first purchase and it was $50 in cost of delivery, now I'm break even on first purchase, right? $100 AOV, I paid $50 in the in actual product, like cost of delivery, COGS, all those things, and I paid $50 in CAC at that point. Now I'm still working at a 2-to-1. Now, if they come back 80%, if there's an 80% increase in value and they come back, that means they're going to spend another $80 over the course of the year. Now we know $40 of that is going to go away in COGS, okay? And so we got to wipe that out. But I don't have to pay for that second purchase. That means there's $40 in contribution margin over the course of a year that I'm going to get. And if I am holding myself to a situation where I have to make money on the first purchase, I'm going to leave some customers on the table who are actually worth $40 contribution margin over the course of the year. And that's real money for a business. That's real money for a business. So that's a big deal. And in fact, you could even make an argument that I should go further and pay $110 for that $100 customer, because now I'm going to leave $30 on the table over the course of a year. And this is where it begins to get more complicated on a financial level. And also, by the way, we should add in one other element, which is that if I profit too much, do you know what I will do with that money in the course of a year? I will pay it to the government in taxes. And that money, in some amount of it, not of course all of it, but let's say it's like, 40% of it or something like that, will just poof, vanish. And so sometimes it makes a lot of sense to think, well, I actually don't want to be too profitable in my business. And if I play that, and this is not a problem for many people, of course, and we should all be so lucky, but it is a real thing for some businesses that are running really well. Now, what happens if we take that same example and we give this business a 250% increase in value? So they spend $1 today, they spend another $2.50 over the course of the year. Now it makes no sense at all to be profitable on first purchase. And it creates all kinds of financing challenges and those sorts of things. And so you see how this works out to where that LTV number, or again, if you have a big word of mouth, or maybe you can mark up some retail sell-through or something like that, that LTV number ends up having a huge effect on what this target should be. And this is the key thing for managing this thing really well. And part of the reason I think one of the ultimate ways to approach this is to build that cohort kind of thinking, that LTV kind of thinking, into a forecast that will allow you to see how this plays out over time. And I'm going to send a link to this. I've mentioned this before, the Lightspeed model forecast, some venture capital group that put together sort of the basics, including a sort of pre-filled out spreadsheet that you can use that gives you a model for how to think about an LTV-based forecast in your business. Or if you're thinking about this and you're getting that mid-8 figures and you've never gone this route, I would give a call to Common Thread Collective, seriously, and talk to them about doing this. This is the fundamental way they add clients the fundamental way they work with clients. They're thinking about all the time, how do we build an LTV-based forecast into your business and then track over time our success relative to that forecast? Well, because here's the thing. If you can forecast out what your LTV, your cohorts are going to be worth to you based on the value of a customer to some degree, and you can be reasonably close on there, now you have covered a lot of the elements that make up your P&L and make up your business, okay? Those elements would be revenue, revenue over time, right? So new customer revenue and returning customer revenue, ad spend, because we've talked about sort of how much do you think you could spend? Acquire those. There's going to be some touch and feel there. If you spend an extra $100,000 this month, if you spend an extra $10,000 this month, how will that change your performance, etc.? You should be able to project out the COGS and the cost of delivery on those customers. Maybe you can project out even like some economy of scale. And if you sell a lot more products, then maybe at that point you can get cheaper COGS or whatever. You can project all that stuff out fairly simply, actually, at least on the COGS side and on the revenue side. The forecasting, the cohort-based forecasting takes some touch and feel. It's a little tricky, but it's very doable. It's not impossible. And you could do it. Just go to that article that I'm going to link in the show notes. Check that out. Go check that out and see if you can do that, or go get on the phone with Common Thread Collective and talk to them about working with you in these kinds of ways. And now that tells you exactly how much contribution margin you have, which, and this is so crucial, then tells how much money you have available to you in OpEx within reason. And this is a mistake I see a lot of brands make. They start to build out this forecast and they're thinking, and as they grow, they're like, oh, I need somebody to do this. I need somebody to do that. I need another customer here. I need whatever. And instead of doing all of those things, what if you, instead of saying, I need this, I need that, whatever, what if you said, this is my budget for SG&A and I'm not going above it. I don't want to get above, let's say, 15%, which I think would be a good number in SG&A. How can I make it so that if I really need this employee, then I can get them at a level. Here's what I'm willing to pay in salary to get that employee relative to my forecast, okay? Those are the things, because then you've now got the entire basis of your P&L forecasted out over more time. And that will give you amazing amounts of freedom and clarity to know how your business is tracking against your goals. And this is sort of the last point that I want to make in all of this. Now, by the way, I mentioned them earlier in this episode, but this is part of why I think there's a great argument to think about working with somebody like More Staffing to hire out employees in the Philippines. Because if you can keep that OpEx low as a percentage of your revenue, then it's just going to make your profit greater. And you can see the effect of that if you actually start to build a cohort-based forecast in your business, okay? So think about that, right? Maybe you don't have the budget for an employee here, and if they're actually a really good professional employee and you're paying less for them, it's a really big win for your business, and you can just see it in your forecast. So there's that. Okay, last thing, goals. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to come back to this. The other big part of this whole equation is, what are you actually trying to accomplish? Not only what are your own skill sets, but like, what are you trying to accomplish? Because I could have two businesses with the exact same unit economics, the exact same expected ad performance, and the exact same LTV, and run the businesses very differently in terms of the targets that I'm setting for myself. Why? Because business A might be willing to take a riskier, more LTV-focused path because, and it is riskier, if you're going to acquire customers at a loss, you have to track to make sure the customers are as valuable to you as you forecast. This is a crucial thing. If you forecast future value in your customers, you must track it week over week at least, and then week over week, and then probably look closely month over month. Say, are our customers coming back? Customers coming back at the rate that we expect them to. If you have a business with very, very big goals, you might be willing to be more aggressive there. If you have a business and you're thinking, I actually am not trying to build a monster of a business or like as big of a business, it's comfortable enough for me to build a $20 million business or whatever, which is still a very impressive thing to build. Like, there's a way of this conversation happens in sort of entrepreneur land that I think can be sort of ridiculous sometimes. Like, if you could build a business like that, it's an incredible outcome. Okay. So let's say you build that business. If you're trying to build 20 million versus 100 million and you have the same unit economics and the same LTV and the same ad spend potential, we'll call it, right? I would take a much lower ROAS target for the brand that's trying to do 20 million than for the brand that's trying to do 100. There just is risk involved with attempting that scale. And so you should be as clear as possible in your mind about how much risk you are willing to take on relative to the goals that you have for your business, because you can make things a lot harder on yourself by pushing your ad spend super, super hard. And on the other hand, you can really miss out on your opportunity by being too conservative if you're trying to build something big. Okay, so that's a lot, that's a mouthful, but I hope you see the point. I cannot give you a ROAS target. What's good for somebody else is not necessarily good for you. There are too many things that matter relative to your particular brand, your particular skill level, your sense of your skill level, your goals, your LTV, all those things. That's how you should determine your target. And the more clarity you can get around each of those details in your business, the better you can answer that question. And I think the more you can reduce your anxiety about how your money is being handled in your business by yourself, by your ad team, by your media buyers, any of those people, if you can get your head around all of those things with as much clarity as possible. So how much should you spend? It depends. build an LTV-based forecast, understand your unit economics, understand your goals, then go determine your answer. I hope this is a helpful episode to you today. I told myself before this episode started that I'm going to try and get detailed and technical, so to speak, a little bit technical on some of these things. So you will have to let me know how this worked out. If you think that I needed to do something to make this clear for you, then let me know. Reach out to me. Email me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com. I'd absolutely love to hear from you in anything you have. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear from you on those sorts of things too. If you have an idea for an episode and you want me to speak to it, totally open to it. So please do reach out to me there or on Twitter @AndrewJFaris. Always a great place to go. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, follow me on the podcast app, tell a friend, give me a rating and a review. Whichever one of those is easiest for you, obviously, is the one that I want you to do. And I want you to know that next week I have an incredible episode for you. Next week, I am going to be talking with Ezra Firestone, and he's just one of the absolute, greatest in this industry. Really smart, really knows his way around things. But we're actually going to be talking not so much about ad tactics. I might take him there a little bit. We'll see. But not just about ad tactics and that sort of thing, but about goals for business, and particularly what I call the self-interested case for generosity, which is something that Ezra has been really vocal about. His tagline for a lot of his stuff you've probably seen is serve the world unselfishly and profit. And I think it's a really interesting approach to life and to business. And I think he's a fascinating thinker on this sort of stuff. So check that out. Ezra Firestone episode coming up next week. Don't miss it. So make sure you do subscribe. And don't forget to check out my friends at More Staffing. They are amazing. I'm a huge fan of theirs. And do let them know that I sent you. That's everything. I will see you next time.
And I read it all. I know the script with my eyes closed.